Hello everybody, welcome to the next episode of Do It Yourself with Other People. I'm Justin Spenner, this is Adam Zahller, and we are going to make some contact mics. So Adam, you've been doing this for a while. What are some practical applications of a contact mic?
A contact mic or a piezo mic there are lots of practical applications because what it does is basically amplifies whatever surface you stick it to. So as long as you have a kind of resonant surface, you can use it as kind of a pickup on anything you like. So I brought just a fresh contact mic here, plug it in.
It's like a cooking show where they bring it out of the oven.
So basically, it's just a little disc that picks up any vibrations. So if I just hold it on this table and squiggle something next to it, you can hear what it does. Or if I put it on my larynx, I can amplify my voice box. Or if I stick it on this kitchen timer,
That's what that's for.
I can amplify it ticking. Or if I taped it to a ukulele or a...
And that's probably where people see this, like, kind of in the wild, in the musical wild. Oh, that was nice. That was nice. I'm glad we got there. People probably see it most in the musical wild, you know, probably as like a mandolin and like those kind of contacts, pickups and everything for acoustic guitar.
Yeah, they build, so if you buy a pickup for your classical guitar, it'll really just be a piezo mic. It might be shaped differently, but here's when we say piezo, it's referring to this, it's a piezoelectric disc. Don't get too caught up on what piezoelectric means. It's just it's a simple thing. And actually, if you have like a, where did it just go? I hit it from myself. If you ever open up like a kid's toy or an alarm clock or a smoke alarm, you'll see a little thing that looks like this. Well, this is just, and it's the speaker. This is just a piezo disc in a little housing. So little buzzers, you know, the buzzer on your stove or the whatever, like oftentimes they're piezo discs. So you can harvest these from toys at the Goodwill or old, you know, smoke alarms or whatever, and you can reuse them for this. Or you can just order them online from an electronics supply, and they're like, you know, maybe 20 cents a piece. They're very inexpensive.
Cool. Yeah, so we got, it looks like we got a lot of tools, but what do we kind of need? What's the bare minimum for this project for materials?
Yeah, so the most crucial thing, I suppose, you want to have a soldering iron. So, and this is a fairly nice one that has a temperature control, but you can get kind of entry-level soldering irons at any hardware store. I would just say that a lot of the ones at the hardware stores are really meant more for like lower temperature, sort of like crafting and stuff. So like if you want to get an electronics kind of level one, a basic one that is serviceable for electronics is still relatively inexpensive. Probably, you know, I'd say could probably get one for maybe $40 or $50 right now. Don't quote me, but you know, this one's a little more expensive because it's got a temperature control, which is really nice. So if you find yourself getting into this, you might go up to the next level. But the soldering iron's the tool that you need, and you might need one that's like a little bit nicer. It'll get a little hotter than the ones that you just pull right off the rack at any Ace Hardware or whatever, but you can find them really easily, and you can definitely order them online. Cool. And you want to have a tip. It can be either the screwdriver shaped tip that this one has, or a pointed tip, but you want a pretty fine, small tip on it.
All right. Well,
Okay, so this.
We
Sorry, I
get
was
to
going to
those.
list the tools, and I just started talking about the soldering iron.
Hey, well, you know.
So the soldering iron is very important. The other things I have here are with the soldering iron, you want to have solder, and this is lead-free with a rosin core. That's what I would recommend using. Rosin core solder. Otherwise, you have to or flux core rather. So you want to have your own. You want it to have the flux in it. Otherwise, you have to have another material called flux. That we're only doing a few little solder points, so it's much easier if you just have this. I've got some wick. This will suck up solder that you end up not using. Or that you need to get off of a pre-existing component to be able to work with it. This is a neat little extra thing that I like. It's called tip tinner, and it prepares the tip of your soldering iron. You can do that with just regular solder, so you don't absolutely need this, but it is nice. It kind of makes things go smoother, is what I find. So I really like to use it. And again, it's really not expensive. A couple bucks for that little thing. And we've got the basic materials for your contact mic. Okay, and we also have snippers and wire strippers. The basic materials for your contact mic are going to be a cheap guitar cable. You could use an expensive one, but why would you?
Why would you?
There's really no reason, because this is going to be sort of lo-fi anyway with these little piezo discs. So don't spend a lot of money on guitar cables. And actually, you could even build your own, but that's another video.
This is another video.
But so I would say just get a cheap guitar cable, and you're going to cut it in half, and you have enough for 2 piezo mics.
Sweet.
Okay, and you can use, so this is a mono cable. It just has a tip and a sleeve. There's no ring. You don't need a stereo cable. In fact, you shouldn't use a stereo cable because you'll just get confused. And it'll be more expensive. And you can use these. This is 1/4 inch. You can use 1/8 inch, or like the headphone jack size. You can use an RCA cable, like what you plug a stereo components in with.
Cool.
It doesn't matter, I would stick with those probably.
Yeah.
But you can use any size of this as long as it's a mono cable, and you can use an RCA cable too.
Cool.
So you can have whatever kind of plugger on it that you want to have. And then what else? I've got epoxy to just kind of finish it off. Not absolutely essential, but it's going to help protect it and sort of finish the product. So I can show you here. Once I join everything up, I just coat it in epoxy and let it set so that it's kind of hard and protected. Because the little solder points where I'm joining materials together are fairly delicate, so that'll protect it and give it longevity. And you can throw it in your ukulele bag and take it to your gig at
your ukulele gig.
Yeah, at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah. Or Astor Cafe.
Or the Astor Cafe, and as the case may be. And then the other thing I've got is shrink stuff. What do you call it?
It shrinks.
Shrinky stuff. Shrink tubing. Heat shrink tubing. It's this will go around the cable, and then you heat it up, and it sucks down. And I haven't done it on this one because I didn't need to the way that I built it. But we might make one with some heat shrink tubing. I might show you that. Also, but that's another option for protecting your solder joints.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So since we got all the materials, let's build it. Let's take a second, and we'll zoom in and build.
Great. Hello, kids, and welcome. Let's get started. This is a piezoelectric disc. You'll see the way that it came. It has some wires, leads coming off of it, and 2 little soldered contact points. I don't want to use these flimsy wires that it came with. If I was building a little self-contained project that just needed a buzzer in it or something, I would just use these because it would make things convenient. But because that's not what I'm doing, I want to build something that I can take to like gigs or whatever. I'm gonna take these off. So I'm gonna use. I wouldn't have to use this. I could probably just snip them. But I think I'm gonna take them off with a little bit of this solder wick. And this is just a copper mesh that will, with a little bit of flux in it, that will suck up old solder. So I'm gonna tin the tip of my soldering iron with my tip tinner, and tinning the tip is just a sort of a, I don't know, a weird little term of art for preparing the tip of your soldering iron. That has way too much on it right now, so I'm gonna clean it off with my wet sponge and my springy wire that comes with my soldering iron stand. And if you don't have a fancy soldering iron stand like this, that's fine. All you really need is a wet sponge. You could also stick a piece of steel wool or something, but you really just need a wet sponge. You can get the excess tip tinner off of there. I have my soldering iron set to 650 degrees right now. Hopefully that's going to be hot enough. That's a good temperature for soldering. Hopefully it's going to be hot enough to pull this solder off. I don't need to get all of it off. In fact, I'm kind of hoping some of it stays. We're going to take our cut in half guitar cable, and you'll see that there's two individual wires inside it. One goes to the tip and one goes to the sleeve. In some projects you would have to keep track of which was which. In this one you don't. It doesn't matter. You just can use either for either. So these two wires are going to go to each of those two contacts, and the only thing that's really important is that they don't touch each other. That would be called shorting it out. So we'll just keep them separate. And I've already stripped these down to expose the surface. But when you cut it in half, you'll have to kind of strip things with a wire stripper. And you can get these tools at any hardware store. Okay, so what I'm going to do before I solder this onto my disc is I'm going to slip a little piece of this heat shrink tubing so that I can cover my work later and cover these little internal wires because they're kind of delicate. And it'll just make everything attractive when I finish it also, because who doesn't like a nice little shot of forest green. Okay, and then here's the fun part. So we're going to solder these onto there, and I'm looking at it and I have probably a little bit more exposed copper than I really need, so I'm just going to trim it down a little bit with my snipper because I really just need just enough to hit those contact points. So I'm going to trim it down a little bit. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to, just like I said, I was tinning the tip of my soldering iron. I'm going to tin this copper wire. Even though it's really small and delicate, I'm going to do what's called tinning. And that's just putting a little bit of solder onto the wire itself. So it's going to help everything stick together. You can kind of think of solder as like glue. And what I'm going to use to help with this is called a helping hands. And it's literally just going to, it's like a little stand that's going to hold that in place for me while I work, because I don't have three hands. And one hand has to hold the solder while the other hand operates the soldering iron. So here's my solder. And this, like I said, is not lead-free rosin core or flux core. So it's got, to put it simply, the flux. It's called flux. It's a material that helps the solder melt and fuse to the other material. So you need the flux in there, and this has it built in. So that's really nice. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna not burn myself, because that tip is 650 degrees, and if you touch it, you'll know. So here I'm gonna just tin my tip a little bit again. I'm gonna wipe it off with my wet sponge. I'm gonna clean it off a little more with my kind of steel wool there. Get it nice and clear, but it's tinned, it's ready to go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my solder sort of under the wire, and I'm going to kind of come in at like about a 45-degree angle. I'm going to just try and push everything together just like that, and I've tinned my wire a little bit. There's just a little bit of solder on that wire already, so that, because you can kind of think of it like this: solder likes to stick to solder. Solder likes to melt solder. Solder is just like people. When it sees some of its friends, it starts to get excited. It starts to want to collaborate. But if it's doesn't meet any cider might help too. If it doesn't meet any solder, it might not want to hang out. So let's do this. I'm going to now, with my tips tinned, I'm going to solder this wire to the piezoelectric disc. I'm going to hold my soldering iron against this stuff for just a moment all together, and I need to get it all. See, this is like the angles are tough, so it's a little bit fiddly, and that's why these helping hands have a magnifying glass on them. If I end up needing it, I'll use it for my weak eyes. Thankfully, I'm nearsighted. Okay, let's do this. Okay, I can kind of pinch that while I heat it up a little bit. I'm going to touch my soldering iron to it, and then put a little extra solder. Ah, come on. Okay, it's really not pretty, but it's attached. And some of the danger is if you cook it for too long, you can just burn through this little disc and ruin the whole thing. But luckily, it only costs about 20 cents. So you're not out much. You can just, like I said, you just have a short memory, and you just start again. And the other thing is, I'm going to cover this whole thing in epoxy at the end, like I said, to protect it. So that ought to do just fine. So what we're going to do, and this is soldered, and solder cools down really quickly. So, you know, it's just barely warm to the touch when I touch it there. So you don't have to wait very long at all for it to be safe to handle. Just be very careful about the tip of your soldering iron, because that will stay hot and for a while after you unplug it even. So before I do my finishing touches, I want to test and make sure this works. And again, if it doesn't work, that's fine. We'll just start again. But I'm going to turn on my little tester amp and tap this bad boy, and it works. And so I'm going to say, from results of our experiment, what I'm going to say is it is better to just snip those rather than to solder wick them off. Wicking it off would be if you're going to become a professional electronics repairman, that's what you would, repair person, that's what you would want to do. But, you know, because you'd have to eventually get really good at this. But we don't have to be good at it. We just have to make it work. And this works, and it's easier. So do it like that. Just snip it. This is working. It's good to go. So let's do our finishing touches. I'm going to turn off my amplifier before I unplug my cable. I'm going to first heat shrink my heat shrink material. Tubing. I've picked a heat shrink tubing that fit pretty snug on the, what do you want to say, the full unstripped part of this cable, the shielded part. Why not? Yeah, anyway. And then it's a little looser around these two little leads, honestly, but it's going to shrink down around them and hug on there, and it'll be pretty good. So it is better to use a heat gun if you have a heat gun. A hairdryer won't work and won't get hot enough, but if you have a heat gun, that would be better. But standard lighter works. You just have to be careful not to like get it way too close and hold it on for too long, and just burn through the material or scorch it. But standard lighter works just fine, and you'll see a lot of electricians will just use a lighter. So you want to kind of just like not touch the flame to it, just get it right by the flame, and keep things moving so it doesn't scorch. And again, be patient and just sort of cook this stuff down. And there'll be a point, like it'll only shrink to a certain point, so that's why I picked the one, like the snuggest I could on the wider part, so that I have the best chance of it like hugging down to a good level where it's not so tight that it wasn't going to work, but that it'll hold things together really, really well. And that's looking pretty good. So we'll call that good. That's heat shrunk down to the point that it's not going to move on me. And I haven't scorched it, so we'll call that a win. All right. And then the final finishing touch, and this is epoxy. I'm going to use epoxy. You can get this at the hardware store or the home improvement store or whatever. And it's a very strong bonding adhesive that dries clear, and you have to combine these two materials together. I always buy the ones that have these weird tubes that mix it well for you, and that way you can really sort of aim it where you want to go and work neatly. So there are other ways to finish these things, by the way. There's like, you can get material that you can like dip it into, although I find that doesn't usually work that well unless you do like a lot of coats of it, because the edges of the piezo disc are kind of sharp, and it tends to like kind of like once it's dried it like cuts through it, and sometimes it can kind of like deaden the sound because you have to cover both sides, and I like leaving one side exposed, like blank, because I feel like I get the strongest pickup that way. So I leave the blank side as the one that I'm going to put against the resonant surface I want to amplify, but then I cover this side because it's sort of delicate with these connections, and so that's what I want to protect. So this basically, it basically dries into like soft plastic that will protect this. So so I'm gonna get this going. You kind of have to. You don't need as much as you think you're going to, but the issue is, it's really gonna stick to you if you touch it. So I kind of try and splort it in a nice ovular pattern in the center here.
Ovular splorting is a good band.
Ovular splort, yeah, that's my new duo free improv project with Justin. Look out for our first EP to drop. Yeah, and then I'm just gonna kind of like squish it all around. Look, see, I said you don't need as much as you think, and then I proceeded to put way too much on here. But that's okay. So, that's all. That's really all. What might happen is it might spread a little bit and then stick your contact mic to your cardboard that you've done this on. But the thing is, it won't be the prettiest, but it's not going to affect the usability of your contact mic at all. So if you're going to be fussy about that, I guess try and use a surface that the epoxy is not going to stick to, although the thing with epoxy that's great is it sticks to almost everything. The other thing you could do is definitely use less epoxy than I just did. The third thing you could do is just make a bunch of these and keep the good ones. keep them all, but use the good ones. Show off the good ones. And that is making a contact mic. Now all we have to do is set this aside for 4 to 6 hours while it cures. That's it.
So, thank you. Is that even on? It's not on.
You just gotta crank it up.
Okay. So, thank you, Adam, for teaching us how to make this contact mic. Is that even? Yeah. You can also use it with children's microphones. So, lots of practical things. If you want to see this this cutting-edge technology used in action, you can check out 113's YouTube page, where Adam and I use contact mics extensively in our rendition of Malbec. So check that out, and thank you very much for walking us through how to make this insanely fun little contraption.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Over and out.